Okay, so that was the probability of a given waiting time, but we can also ask, on average, how long do we expect to wait? Right? What's the average wait? So in general, we're going to use this E to mean the expectation of this quantity. So the average amount of this quantity that we expect. And so in general, the expectation of a quantity is going to be equal to the probability that that quantity is equal to 1 times 1, right? Because if this is 1, then we want to sum that probability in as 1 times the probability that the value is 2 times 2 plus the probability that the value is 3 times 3. So for instance, if we want to know the average amount of time we have to wait till something occurs, we can say, well, what's the probability we only have to wait 1? And then we're going to sum that as 1. The probability that we only have to wait 2 times the probability of 2. The probability we have to wait 3 times 3. Okay? So then we can rewrite this as the sum from I equals, well, in this case, 1 to infinity, of the probability that the waiting time is the probability that the waiting time is I times I, right? Probability 1 times 1 plus probability 2 times probability of 3 times 3, and so forth. Okay, so now if we, let's do this for the probability of the waiting time. So in the last video, we showed that the probability of the waiting time was the probability of 1 was 1 times p. The probability that was 2 was 1 minus p times p. The probability that was 3 was 1 minus p squared times p plus the probability, plus 4 times this, and so forth, right? Okay, so let's write this down in summation form. So what we can notice is that we've got this value is being taken to the 0, 1, 2, 3 power. So this is 1 here and 0, 2 goes with factor 1, 3 goes with 2, 4 goes with 3. So there's actually a few different ways we can write this. So one way to write it would be, we could write this as the sum from if we could do this, and then that would be I plus 1. So when this is 0, this value is 1, times p to the I. I'm sorry. Times 1 minus p to the I times p. Sorry about that. Okay, so that would be one way to write this value, right? Let's make sure it works. So for when I is 0, we would get 0 plus 1, 1 times nothing, because it's to the 0, times p, 1p. When I is 1, we get 2 times 1 minus p to the 1 times p, which is what we get here, and so forth. So that would be one way to write it. Another way to write it would be as using I equals 1 here. And then if we do that, then now what we're doing is, it's actually I, so 1, times 1 minus p to the I minus 1 times p. So then we get 1 times nothing times p. And we get, when I is 2, we get 2 times 1 minus p to the 1 times p, and so forth. And actually we can recognize here that we could just add another term, another 0 term in, right? So let's compare these two quantities. What happens if we do this with 0? So we've added a new term in here. The new term that we've added in is what? It's when I equals 0. So what's that equal to? Well, it's actually equal to 0 because when I is 0, this term has no value. So we can set these two things equal to each other. All we've done here is just added this extra term. Okay, I've written it these three ways because it's going to let us do a trick. not because it's interesting in its own right. Okay, so let me refer to my notes for 1 sec. Okay, so let's work with this one. With this one, so we've got the expectation of the time. This should have been expectation of time. The expectation of the time is equal to this thing here. Okay. So now we're just going to rearrange this a little bit. So the first thing we're going to do, so we can recognize actually we're going to split this one in half, right? So we're going to take it and we're going to take this 1 out. Okay, so we're going to take that 1 out and put it over here over by itself. So all we're doing here is if we're multiplying I plus 1 times some value, then that's the same thing as, and then summing them all up, that's the same thing as multiplying I times this value, and also plus 1 times this value, and then summing it all up. Okay? And we can just get rid of that 1 because we don't need it. And so I'm going to do one more trick here, which is this says 1 minus p to the I minus 1. So I'm going to take one of those 1 minus p's and I'm going to stick it outside here. So I'm going to make this be 1 minus p to the I minus 1. So I've just divided this whole thing by 1 minus p. So now I need to multiply it by 1 minus p. And so all I've done now is just rewritten things that are equal. Okay, but this is what allows us to do the trick. So notice that this value here is the same as this value here. And so what that means is that this value is equal to e of t. And so now we have 1 minus p e of t. And then what about this value? Well, you might recognize, so this value, if we take this p and stick it out here, then we recognize this value as being the summation that we did, and we know that that's equal to 1 over p. So we have p times 1 over p. And so this value is actually just 1. Okay, and so we're getting close here. So what we have is that e of t is equal to 1 minus p e of t plus 1. We can rearrange that. So now we get e of t times p is equal to 1, or the expected waiting time is 1 over the rate. So if I'm rolling a dice and I have a 1/6 chance of getting a 3, sorry, if I have a 1/6 chance of getting a 3, then on average I'm going to have to roll 6 times until I get it. If I have a coin and I'm flipping it and I have a 1/2 chance of getting a heads, then I'm going to have to, on average, flip 2 times. I might have to flip once, I might have to flip 1,000 times, but on average it's going to be 2 times.